this movie only concerns Windows users, so you Mac users can jump to the next movie or just sit and eavesdrop while I talk to the Windows users. Actually, it's a pretty short movie, so you might just want to watch anyway just to see what's going on the other side of things. In the Windows version of Dreamweaver, the first time you open up the program, you're going to see this dialog box asking you whether you want your workspace set up based on whether you're more of a designer or more of a coder. If you choose designer, your Dreamweaver workspace will be set up as an integrated workspace where all the document windows and panels are contained within one large window. Unless you plan on doing a lot of hand coding, I suggest you go with this arrangement because it makes working with multiple documents and panels much, much easier. If you choose coder, your workspace will be set up with all the panel groups docked to the left side of the screen, and your documents will open in code view by default. Now, in these movies, I'm going to be working almost entirely in the designer workspace, so I suggest you do the same. I'll be showing you in just a few movies from now how you can customize your workspace even after you've made this initial choice, because this dialog box is only going to appear the first time you open up Dreamweaver. And you see they do give you a little hint here saying that you can change the layouts later by selecting Window Workspace Layout. And again, I'll show you that in just a little bit. So with Designer selected, I'll click on OK. Dreamweaver will open up. Okay, and there it is. There's our workspace setup. Now, if you're a Mac user and you're still listening to me, you don't have to worry about that whole workspace setup dialog box because you won't see that. The default Mac workspace looks pretty much just like this Windows Designer workspace, except the Mac has all free-floating windows and panels that aren't contained within one large window like it is here on the Windows version. And again, we'll take a closer look at the differences between the Windows and Mac interfaces in just a couple of movies from now. When you launch Dreamweaver 8, and after it goes through its brief opening routine, you see this screen here, which is known as the Start page. This was a feature that was introduced in the previous version of Dreamweaver, Dreamweaver MX 2004. That name just rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? Anyway, the purpose of the Start page is to give you quick access to a whole bunch of different options for tasks that you might want to jump into right away after launching the program. So let's see what we've got here. On the left-hand side, we have a column that lets you open any documents that you were recently working with. So if I had opened Dreamweaver before and had been working with some documents, I would see them all listed here. And I could click on their names to quickly open them without having to come up here and choose File, Open, and hunt around for them. I also have the option of clicking this open link to navigate out to my hard drive to look for a file that I want to open from here. Over here, under the Create New column, you have quick links for creating new pages, like regular HTML pages, technically XHTML pages, but we'll talk more about that later. Or if you're working with Cold Fusion pages, PHP, ASP, and so on, you can click any of these items to create that type of page. You can even create a new Dreamweaver site from right here. Creating a site is a very important topic that we'll be talking about in depth in just a little bit. And if you don't see the type of page that you want listed here, you can click More to open the New Document window and browse through a list of all the types of pages that Dreamweaver can create. This is the window that you see. Let me cancel that for a moment. Anytime you choose File, New, or hit Control-N, or on the Mac, Command-N, you're brought to the same window here. So let me just close that for a moment. Over here on the far right, we have the Create from Samples column. And there are some pretty cool things in here. Here you can create new pages based on a pretty wide variety of templates and samples that Macromedia included with Dreamweaver. For example, you have an option here called Page Designs, parentheses CSS. And back in the previous chapter, I took you to CSS Zen Garden and showed you some examples of pages that were heavily CSS driven. So here in Dreamweaver, you can do the same thing by selecting a page layout, just by going under Page Designs here, and letting Dreamweaver handle all the code for you. This is also a great way to start learning advanced CSS. You can let Dreamweaver do all the setup work, and then you can examine the code it wrote to learn how certain things are accomplished. Of course, if you don't want to get that in-depth with CSS, you can choose to start with some more basic CSS style sheets to determine just the colors and fonts for your pages, or you can click on Starter Pages and Page Designs here to work with some examples of layouts that aren't so heavily controlled by CSS. These are layouts that were designed using traditional tables. So you can see there are a lot of different designs in here, and a lot of them are really pretty good. And you can always customize them to suit your needs. So let me just cancel out of that. And also on the start page here, we have a link that will take you to the Dreamweaver Exchange if you have a live internet connection. And clicking that will take you to the Dreamweaver Exchange on Macromedia's website, where you can browse through and download all sorts of useful add-ons and extensions that have been specifically designed for Dreamweaver. You'll find all sorts of useful actions and behaviors created for specific purposes that can really make your life a lot easier. And we'll be taking a lot closer look at the Dreamweaver Exchange in the chapter on installing extensions. And here at the bottom of the start page, you can take an interactive tour of Dreamweaver by clicking on this link. Again, this will take you to the Macromedia website. Actually, all of these will take you to the Macromedia website. You can learn about documentation resources, and you can find authorized training. But you already have found authorized training, so no need to click on that. So the start page can be a pretty useful springboard, especially if you're just starting out with Dreamweaver and web design. But as you start getting more comfortable and get a better idea of how to work with Dreamweaver on your own, you might not want to see the start page every time you open the program. In fact, if you have a document open and you close it and you have no documents open, the start page pops right back up again. So if you want to get rid of that, go to the Edit menu and go to Preferences. If you're on the Mac, go to the Dreamweaver menu and go to Preferences. And here in Preferences, make sure you have the General category selected and just uncheck Show Start Page. And then when you click on OK, if I close Dreamweaver and restart it, notice this time I just have a blank slate. There's no start page here. Now, for some reason you'd like to start seeing it again, you miss its comforting glow, you've grown accustomed to its face, or whatever, you can bring it back by just going back to Preferences and just checking Show Start Page again, and everything will be back the way it was once you open it up again. And there's our happy little start page. Macromedia has always been pretty good about keeping the interface differences between the Windows and Mac versions of Dreamweaver to a minimum. It makes it much easier on people who have to work on both platforms to get their bearings and then just get to work. For the most part, things are pretty much the same in Dreamweaver on both Windows and Mac. Most of the differences have to do with the basic differences between the two operating systems, and not the differences between the two versions of Dreamweaver. For example, in Windows, the entire Dreamweaver application appears inside one big window. Every panel, window, and dialog box appears in this window, and therefore clicking this Minimize button up here minimizes the entire application. This is also something you want to be careful about, because I've seen a lot of people who intend just to close the web page, and you actually close them with these buttons here, come up here to the very top close button here for the entire application, and end up quitting out of the entire program. It's not the end of the world, because Dreamweaver will prompt you to save any changes you haven't saved, and you can always cancel from there. And even if you've saved your changes and the program just closes, you can just open it up again. But it does get annoying if you start making the same mistake over and over again by clicking that close button up there, so just be aware of that issue. The Macintosh interface, on the other hand, has all free-floating windows and panels. You can see if I move this window around, you can actually see my desktop in the background there. And it's nice to have all these free-floating windows, but this also can pose its own set of issues. For instance, it's much easier to accidentally close your palettes on the Mac side. For example, I've seen a lot of people just close the Properties Inspector because it's in their way. Now you can always bring it back from the Windows menu just by selecting Windows, Properties, and you can bring it back that way. But it's much easier to make this mistake on the Mac side than it is to make it on the Windows side, because the panels here don't actually have close buttons on them. And we'll talk more about the panel groups in a little bit, but to actually close these panels in Windows, you either have to right-click on them and choose Close Panel Group, or come up to the Window menu here and actually uncheck the panels that you want to close. Now, speaking of the Window menu, it is important in both versions of Dreamweaver to know that if you come up to the Windows menu, you can find all the panels that are available in Dreamweaver, and this is also where you'll want to go if you've accidentally closed a panel and can't figure out how to get it back. If I did accidentally close my Properties panel or my Insert panel, all I would have to do is come back up here and choose it right from that Window menu to bring that panel back. You're also going to find valuable keyboard shortcuts under the Window menu, so you'll probably want to memorize the shortcuts for the panels that you use most often, like Command or Control F3 for the Properties Inspector. It's Control on Windows and Command on the Mac side. Another really useful feature you'll find under the Window menu is the Workspace Layout. This is great if you've just totally screwed up your workspace to the point where you can't even recognize it anymore. So if I start dragging some things around like this, move that there, move this here, move that there, and things have just gotten completely messed up. All you have to do to fix it is just come up here to the Window menu, go to Workspace Layout, and here on the Mac you can just select Default to go back to the way Dreamweaver first appeared before you mess things up. On Windows, from the Window menu, you can go to Workspace Layout and you can choose Coder or Designer, just like you did when you first opened Dreamweaver for the first time. Both Mac and Windows versions also give you layout options if you have multiple monitors connected to your computer called dual screen. I can't really show you what this looks like because I don't have 2 monitor screens right now, so you'll just have to try that out on your own. So right now it's basically moved everything into one screen, but basically what the dual screen does for you is it puts your document window on one of your monitors and puts all your panels on another monitor. But again, I can't really show that to you, so let me switch that back to the default designer layout. There we go. If you do have multiple monitors, you'll actually see a listing in here under Workspace called Dual Screen Left or Dual Screen Right. Okay, so basically there are only very minor differences between the Mac and Windows versions of Dreamweaver, and pretty much all the differences have to do with the operating system differences and not the differences in Dreamweaver itself. In the next movie, let's start taking a look at some of these specific panels that we find here in Dreamweaver and see what they're actually for. Okay, let's start by looking at some of the essential Dreamweaver interface items. I'm going to use the Start page here to create a basic page by simply clicking on the HTML button. That'll just quickly give me a new blank document. So we'll begin by looking at this thing up here called the Insert bar, and that's this bar right here. The Insert bar contains a row of icons, as you can see right here, and each one represents an element that you can add to a web page. And a lot more icons exist than the ones you initially see here. For your convenience, the Insert bar is broken into several different categories that you can access from this menu. We've got Common, Layout, Forms, Text, HTML, Application, Flash Elements, and Favorites. Selecting a category brings up a totally different set of icons, each one having something to do with the category that you just selected. For example, if I'm building a form on my web page, I'd switch to the Form category, and here I'll find all the tools necessary to build a form, like text fields and radio buttons and checkboxes and so on. If I switch back to the Common category, I'll see the icons for all the most common tasks I'd be most likely to perform. These include things like inserting images or adding tables or adding an email link and things like that. Now you can customize this menu to some extent by selecting the Show as Tabs selection from that menu. Now some people prefer this layout because it lets you see all the insert categories at once without having to click and select from a menu. So I can jump right to forms from here, or text, or anything like that, just by clicking on these tabs. And if you prefer to work this way, that's fine. Just switch it over to Show as Tabs and you're all set. It's really up to you to decide which format you prefer. I'm going to switch mine back to the menu layout by coming up here and clicking on this menu icon and choosing Show as Menu. It just takes up a little bit less space that way, and I'm already kind of short on space on the way I'm recording here, so I'm going to leave it as the menu layout here. Now you can further customize the insert bar by adding your own favorites. Truth be told, you're probably not going to use even half of the objects found in the insert bar most of the time. As you progress in your Dreamweaver usage, you'll get a better idea of which insert objects you find yourself using most of the time, and you might find it convenient to have them all located in one place rather than spread across several different categories. You might have already noticed that one of the categories here is Favorites. Notice it's currently empty, but to add an icon to your favorites, it says here just right-click to customize your favorite objects. If you're on a Mac with only one mouse button, you can control-click on any object to add it to your insert bar. So all I need to do is right-click anywhere inside of my insert bar here. It can be on an icon itself. It can just be over here in a blank space. Anywhere I right-click or control-click is going to take me to this window here, Customize Favorite Objects. Here you can just select each icon that you commonly use and add it to the pane to the right. So let's say that under the Common area here, I know I always use the Insert Image, so I'm just going to click this arrow. Now it's a favorite object. or say under, actually you can actually look through the categories this way as well. So let's say under forms, I always use text areas. So I will add that there as well. Notice that you can move items up and down the list. So if I wanted to swap the areas here, I could do that. And you can even add a separator. So if I wanted to separate the image insert and the text area insert, visually I can do that. So maybe I use several other form objects a lot. They would always go there. And maybe if I just go back to the common elements, I always use hyperlink and email link. But those need to go up above the marker, so I'll just, with those selected, I'll just click the up arrow, put it above the separator. Same thing with hyperlink. And something like that. So once you're done, all you have to do is click on OK. If you switch to the Favorites menu here, notice that all the items I selected are now listed here, including that separator that separates my common elements with my form elements. And of course, if you need something that isn't listed here, you can just pull it up in its category to find it, and then just add it to your favorites, and then it'll be listed here. If you want to get rid of anything, just right-click here again, or again, if you're on the Mac, Control-click. And if I no longer find myself using the email link a lot, I can just select that, trash it, click OK, and you can see it's been removed from my favorites here. So that's the insert bar. It's definitely a panel that you'll want to keep open all the time. Now, you can actually find just about everything that's available in the insert bar under the insert menu as well in all these separate categories. But I think it's much easier to just use the insert bar and click icons rather than pulling down a menu and going through all these submenus. And remember, if you accidentally close the insert bar, and it's easier to do on the Mac than the PC, just hit Control F2 to bring it back. Or you can also go up to your window menu. You'll see insert here, and you can toggle that on and off. But it's definitely one of the ones that you should keep open all the time. Next in our tour of the Dreamweaver interface, we have the Properties Inspector, which is this panel down here at the bottom. And in my opinion, and many other people's opinions, this is probably the most important panel to have open at all times when you're designing your pages. The Properties Inspector is a contextual panel, meaning that its contents change depending on what element you have selected on your web page. For example, because I'm looking at a blank page right now with this cursor flashing up here, Dreamweaver assumes that I'm going to be working with text. Therefore, the Properties Inspector is displaying text properties like the font, the size, the style, bold, italicized, things like that. But if I come up here to my insert bar and insert a table, I'll just click on OK here to just put a default table in here. With the table selected, I now see table properties like rows, columns, cell pads, cell space, border, width, and height, things like that. Now don't worry if that doesn't mean anything to you right now. We'll be looking at tables a little bit later. But for now, I just want to get across that the Properties Inspector changes based on what you have selected on your page. And again, the Property Inspector is definitely a panel that you want to keep open all the time because unlike, say, the insert bar up here, where you can find a lot of the same things under the insert menu, the properties settings that appear in the Properties Inspector don't appear anywhere else in Dreamweaver, or at least many of them do not. So if the panel is closed, you won't be able to make necessary changes. You also want to make sure that the panel is expanded the whole way by making sure this triangle down here is pointed up. If I click that, notice that it collapses on itself and it's a shorter panel now. So you want to make sure you see that whole thing. The Property Inspector is expanded by default, but if you or someone else accidentally collapses it at some point, you might miss certain property settings. In fact, you will miss certain property settings unless you open it back up again. So definitely keep that open unless you're really hurting for screen real estate. And finally, like other panels, the Properties Inspector can be open and closed from the Window menu by choosing Window Properties or hitting Control F3 or Command F3 if you're on the Mac. Now let's turn our attention to the document window itself and its toolbar that's running across the top of the window there. The document window is where you actually will be creating your web pages. We'll be getting into some of the Windows properties in the next movie, but first, let's take a look at the toolbar running across the top of the window. The document toolbar contains several buttons and menus that let you do things like change the document view, set the page title, preview the page in a browser, and several other things. So let's just work our way from left to right to get a brief overview of what's available up here, and we'll get into more detail with many of these items later. First of all, we have this group of 3 buttons: Code, Split, and Design. By default, we're looking at our page in Design View because we chose Design View when we first opened Dreamweaver for the first time, or if you're on a Mac, it just opens up in Design View by default anyway. Design View is a view that displays your page in what's called WYSIWYG mode, or what you see is what you get, WYSIWYG. Unless you're a coder, this is the view that you'll use most often because the Design View hides all the behind-the-scenes coding that Dreamweaver is performing and lets you concentrate on just laying out the page. It gives you a pretty accurate depiction of what your page is going to look like in an actual web browser. Now, of course, the best way to see how your page looks in a particular browser is to actually view it in that browser, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Now, if you want to take a glance at the code, or if you want to go in and manually change the code, you can click the Code View button. This displays all the code that's necessary to create the page that we're currently looking at. Notice that even with what appears to be a blank page in Design View, we already have a fair amount of necessary code that Dreamweaver has already written for us to have this blank page. The third view is Split View, and this lets you see both the code and design views in separate panes in the same window. What's nice here is that if you make a change to the design pane, so if I click down here and type some text, you'll notice that the change also occurs up here in Code View, and that pretty much happens immediately. And if you manually change the code, actually I should click out of there we go, we see the text update down here in Design View. Now I should mention that there is another way in Dreamweaver to simultaneously view both the code and design views. Let me just go back to Design for a moment here. I have the option of going to the Window menu and choosing to show the Code Inspector, or I can activate that with F10, and that opens up the Code Inspector. And the advantage here is this lets me see my entire page in a larger view and lets me look at the code in a smaller window off to the side. So if I prefer to do that so I don't have a small cramped window to look at my page in, I can have it set to Design View and then open up the separate Code Inspector, which shows me the exact same view of the code. So I press F10 and the Code Inspector disappears again. Okay, next we have the page title area. You can see title and then a field over here. Now the text that you enter here appears at the top of your browser window when the browser opens this page, and is commonly used as the title for the page when someone bookmarks the page in a browser. So you want to make sure that you give each of your pages a good descriptive name. We're going to talk a lot more about page titles in the chapter on document basics. Moving along, we have another series of buttons here to the right. The first one we have here is our browser target check button. This is a useful option that lets you validate your page's code to see how it's going to stand up in different browsers. From here you can select Check Browser Support if you want to run a check right away. Actually, it's telling me I need to save my document. I'm not really going to bother with that right now, so let me cancel there. Or you can select to have it auto-check every time you open a document. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later as well, but there's also some settings here that you can choose from to decide which browsers you want to test your page against. So the default here in Windows is Internet Explorer and Netscape Navigator. So I'm just going to click Cancel and leave everything like that. And we'll talk more about that later again. Next we have our Validate Markup button, a new feature to Dreamweaver 8. This button lets you check your code for tag and syntax errors. You can choose to just check the current document, validate the entire current local site, meaning all the pages in your site, or validate just the particular files that you might have selected. If you choose the Settings button here, that'll take you to your Dreamweaver preferences and automatically select the Validator category. And then you can choose what type of code your page should be validated against. So for instance, if you wanted to make sure that you were following strict XHTML guidelines, you could select that, or any of these other document types here. Next we have our File Management button, and this lets you upload and download files from your web server to your computer or vice versa. We haven't set up our web server settings yet, so I can't show you much here right now, but we'll get to uploading and downloading in the chapter on getting your site online. Next we have our Preview in Browser button, which launches your page in the browser of your choice so that you can see what it'll really look like in that particular browser. I'll show you how to set this up later in this chapter. Next button is our Refresh Design View button, which you can use if you've made some changes to the page's code that haven't shown up in Design View yet. Clicking Refresh tells Dreamweaver to wake up and look at the new code and update the Design View. Second to last, we have the View Options button. which lets you control several different options, but what you see in this menu depends on which view you're looking at here. So in Design View, I see I can choose to look at my head content. I can hide the rulers if I want to, or if I want to see them. I can turn on the grid, hide the guides if I want to, and so on. I'll just keep guides on and hide head content there again. But if I switch to Code View, the menu changes. Now I have things like word wrap, line numbers, hidden characters, all these different things that I may or may not want to see while I'm in Code View. If you switch to the Split View, you see both the Design and Code View options here. So the Code View options are here at the top, and the Design View options are here down at the bottom. It's also from this menu, while you're in Split, you can choose to flip the positions and put Design View on top and the Code View on the bottom. So that's the View Options button. Go back to Design View there. And lastly, we have the Visual Aids button, which lets you show and hide various things like table borders, image maps, layer outlines, and so on. I can't really show you any of these things right now because the page is pretty much empty except for some text, but we'll be using this menu occasionally as we go along. And Macromedia has added some really useful features to this particular menu, which I'll be pointing out throughout these movies. So that's the document toolbar. It appears at the top of every document window, so familiarize yourself with that. So next we'll take a look at the actual document window itself. As I mentioned in the previous movie, the document window is where most of the action in your web page creation is going to occur. This is where you'll be inserting images, typing text, creating tables, building forms, and so many other things. So let's take a look at a couple of features of this window. We already examined the document toolbar in the previous movie. If you look at this tab above it here, you'll see the actual name of the file itself. Don't confuse this file name with the page title. Again, the page title is the text that the person browsing your page will see in the title bar of his or her browser. So if I add a title here of All About Us, press return, notice that has no change on the tab up here. It still says Untitled 1. What we're seeing up here is the actual file name. The file name is the name of the document itself, the one that needs to end in .html or .htm. This little asterisk next to the file name is a visual indicator to let you know that changes have been made to the page that have not been saved. I haven't even saved this page at all. So let me just save this real quick. File save. And just for this exercise, I'm just going to save this to my desktop. I'll just call this one testing, since I'm just testing this out right now. Testing.html. If I save that, notice I see that file name, testing.html, and the asterisk has now disappeared. If I add some text to the page, notice that asterisk immediately reappears to tell you that you've made some changes that have not yet been saved. So again, if I hit Command or Control S, that'll save the document and the asterisk will disappear. Additionally, if you're working on the Mac version of Dreamweaver, the red close button that appears in the upper left-hand corner will have a dark dot within it. This is Mac OS X's way of letting you know that you haven't saved the changes to your page. Both this black dot and the Dreamweaver asterisk will disappear when you save your page in OS X. Okay, so let's make our way across the bottom of our document window here, starting from the left side. First of all, we have this tag down here that says Body. If we had more content on our page right now, we'd actually see more tags. This whole bottom left-hand side is known as the Tag Selector area. As you select different elements on your web page, their corresponding HTML tags will appear down here. You can also click the tags themselves to select the things that they represent. So when I click Body, that basically selects everything on my page because the body tag represents the entire contents of my page. The tag selector becomes especially useful when you need to select items that are sometimes hard to click, like when you're working on a table and you're having trouble clicking in a small table cell. Clicking the table cell tag down here is much easier, and I'll show you how to do that with tag selectors when we get to the chapter on working with tables. And speaking of difficult to select elements, these next four buttons are new to Dreamweaver 8. The first item here is a select tool, a pointer tool, arrow tool, whatever you want to call it. And it's selected by default. It lets you select items on your page, and you'll want to have it selected most of the time. The next item is the hand tool, and it lets you drag your page around on the screen instead of using the scroll arrows. Can't really demonstrate that right now because I don't have any content on my page that necessitates me to scroll the page, so I'll show you how to use that in just a little bit. Now I also have this magnifying glass. For the first time ever in Dreamweaver, you can now zoom in on your page to get a closer look at your page elements. This makes it much easier to see and select small items like tiny table cells. So if I type some more text and some more text, with my magnifying glass selected, I can actually click and zoom in on my page. Once I'm zoomed in, I can select my hand tool, and now I can drag the page around as necessary if I need to look closer at an area that's currently off screen. I should also mention that when the zoom tool is selected, pressing the space bar temporarily gives you the hand tool so you don't have to click between the two buttons. So if I've zoomed into this level and I just need to tap it over, I can hit the space bar on my keyboard and just use that to get the hand tool to drag my page around. Once I let go of the space bar, it goes back to my zoom tool. I should also mention that with the zoom tool selected, pressing Option on the Mac or Alt on Windows gives you the zoom out tool. Notice that the plus symbol turns into a minus sign, so with that held down, I can zoom out from my page. And that works much like it does in many other programs that use zoom tools. Now you can also use this new pop-up menu here to select from some preset magnifications. So if I wanted to go all the way up to 6400% for some reason, I could do that, or jump all the way down, to 6% if I want to see a very small version of my page. Just go back to 100% for a moment there. Now you also have options at the bottom of this menu for fit selection, fit all, and fit width. Now, fit selection takes whatever's selected and magnifies and zooms in on it so that it fits in a nice large size within your current window size. Fit all changes the magnification so that the entire contents of your page fit in the window. And again, I don't have much content on this page, so it stays at 100%. If you have a very large page, this can result in a very tiny magnification level. And fit width here sets the magnification so that the entire width of the page fits in the window so you don't have to scroll left or right if you had particularly wide content on your page. Now, it's important for me to note here that the magnification settings have no effect whatsoever on how people are going to see your web page. Viewing the page at 400% doesn't mean that it's going to show up that way on your website. The magnification settings here are just for your use in Dreamweaver. For the most part, when you're designing and laying out your site, you should have the magnification level set to 100% so you can see the page exactly as your visitors will. But for those times when you do need to zoom in and zoom out, it's nice that those tools are now available here in Dreamweaver 8. Okay, next we have our window size menu. And this menu lets you select from some preset window sizes. And this menu lets you resize your window to various preset sizes. Now, currently it's not letting me do this because I'm in what's called tab mode right now. You don't have to worry about this on the Mac side of things, but if you want access to this menu in Windows, you're going to have to click the window button here so you can view it in just a window. Then you can access these settings here. One of the important things to remember about web design is that not everyone is going to be viewing your web page in the same size browser window. Selecting different window sizes from this menu lets you see how your page will potentially look on a monitor that's been set to 640 by 480 pixels, or 1024 by 768, or whatever setting you like. Actually, this is too big now. Let me go back to tab view so I can see that again. Now, I just switched to the tab view for the moment because I was not able to select that menu anymore because the window got too big for my screen here. So let me just show you how to fix that. Like if I switch back to the windowed view here, I had chosen 1024 by 768, which made my window very, very large. And unfortunately, in Dreamweaver on Windows here, I can't drag this any higher to get to my resize buttons down at the top here. So I'm going to come up to the window menu and hide my panels for the moment. Now I can see everything. Let me switch that back down to a smaller size. In fact, let me just do this manually there. And now I'll just turn my panels back on. So it's good to know how to be able to resize your window should you make it too big. So that's how you would do it. Just hide your panels so you can see the entire window. And that way you'll be able to resize it manually. So that's the window resize menu here. And you can even create your own custom sizes by choosing Edit Sizes here. Now, I should mention that just like the magnification settings that we were looking at over here, the window size settings have no effect on the actual layout of your page. All the window size menu does is resize your window to show you how things might look in a browser window that size. This menu doesn't fix your page to work at that size or anything like that. Let me go ahead and switch back to my tabbed view there. And lastly, we have the download speed display down here in the lower right-hand corner, which is there to give you an idea of the approximate file size of your page so far, as it stands right now, and how long it might take to download. By default, the download speed is set to assume a 56K connection, but you can change this setting by selecting Edit Sizes from the Window Size menu, and this is just a shortcut to the status bar category in Dreamweaver Preferences. Down here at the bottom, you can choose a connection speed for the download estimate, so if you wanted to see how fast your page might load with somebody who had an old 14.4 baud modem, you could choose that, or leave it at 56K, or choose any of the faster speeds here as well. And it's also in here where you can choose some custom window sizes for that window size menu. Okay, so that's the document window and a rundown of its various menus and tools. One last thing I should probably talk about, since we kind of looked at it in this movie, is this tabbed setting here. If you open more than one window at a time, if I choose File New, and just choose to create a basic HTML page, notice that it creates the page in a tab here. It opens up the new page, and I can toggle back and forth between these two pages by clicking on these tabs. This makes it really easy to switch back and forth among your pages as you're working on them. And you can still view the pages in their own windows if necessary, if you need to, for instance, drag something from one page to another. All you need to do is click this button right here like I did before, and that separates the pages into separate windows. If you're working on a Mac, you want to right-click or control-click on that tab, and there's a command that'll show up in this menu called Move to New Window, which if you select will pop that particular tab into its own window. The nice thing about the Mac version is that if you have 3 or more tabs open, you can free just one page into its own window and keep the other ones tabbed together in a single window. So if I hit the Close button with this tab selected, it doesn't close the entire group here, it just closes that particular window, and now I'm back looking at this page here. So that's working with the document window in Dreamweaver 8. Now let's take a look at these panel groups docked on the right-hand side of your screen. If you want to follow along with me in this movie, you might want to go up to the Window menu, go to Workspace Layout, and choose Designer to make sure you get the default layout for all of these panels. If you're on a Mac, choose Default as your workspace layout. So if you're on your Mac, you'd go to Windows, Workspace Layout, and you'd have an option here called Default, which is basically the same as Designer. Okay, so what are we looking at over here? Well, in Dreamweaver, all of these tabbed areas in here are called panels. This is a panel, this is a panel, that's a panel, this is a panel, this is a panel. Each panel serves a different purpose, and you'll bring them up as you need them. Now, to keep things organized, the panels are collected into what are called panel groups. Each of these bars, CSS, application, tag, all of the bars that have these little triangles next to them are referred to as panel group. Each one is an individual panel group. And you can see their contents by twirling the triangle either up or down if you want to see them, and up if you don't want to see the contents of that panel group. So let me twirl a couple of these closed. So you can see if I have the Files panel group open, I have access to the Files, Assets, and Snippets panels. And I can access each one here by clicking its tab. And the same goes for all the other panel groups. So if I was in the Tag Inspector, I could go to Behaviors, or I could go to Attributes. If I'm in CSS, I can go to CSS Styles or Layers, and so on. Some of these panels you'll be using a whole lot, and some of them you'll probably hardly ever use. Now, one thing you can do on the Windows side of things with your panel groups, see this little skinny button right here? If I click on that, all of my panels shove off to the side of my screen, which is great if you need more room to work on your page. You might prefer to work like this and then just click that button again to bring all your panels back when you need them. Now, you can also drag this button to the left or to the right to give yourself more room or less room for your panels. It works the same for the Properties panel down here. It has a tiny little button here as well. I can click that to make it disappear, click it again to make it reappear, or drag it up or down. But again, you'll probably want to keep your Properties Inspector open at all times. If you prefer to have more space to work with your document, you might want to learn the keyboard command for showing and hiding the panels, which is F4. F4 shows and hides your panels just like so. But panels also include the Properties panel and the Insert bar at the top there, so that gets rid of everything. So you'll most likely need, after you press F4, to press Control F3 to bring back your Properties Inspector, and Control F2 to bring back your Insert bar if you'd like your layout to be like this. Or if you want everything to come back, just press F4 a couple times till everything comes back like so. And it's the same keyboard commands on the Mac, F4 to show and hide the panels, Command F3 to show and hide the Properties panel, and Command F2 to show and hide the Insert bar. You just don't have these little skinny buttons on the Mac because Dreamweaver on the Mac doesn't appear in one large window. Okay, now each panel group has a little options menu right there. If I open up a couple more of these, you see each one has this menu in the header for each of these panel groups. And these menus contain a couple of menu items for things that you can do within that panel group. And this option menu is a little bit different for each group. For instance, in the Files group here, with snippets selected, I have things like New Snippet, New Folder, Rename, Delete, so on and so on. If I switch over to Files, I've got things like File, Edit, Servers, things like that. Or if I'm up here in the Tag Inspector, I see different options here as well. So again, depending on what tag you have selected and which panel you click in, you'll see different options in here. And we'll mention some of these options as we go along. Another nice thing about panel groups is that you can sort of tear them out of this area over here on the right to make each group into its own floating panel. The trick here is to make sure that you grab this sort of gripper area here to the left of the group's name. You see these little, what looks like a bunch of indentations to the left. When I see this cursor appear, I can just drag out, and now I have a floating panel group. And this really helps you customize your workspace. I can drag out the panel groups that I need, like, say, Files and CSS. Let's move it right down there. Oops. Let's pop that open. And then I can just close the ones that I don't need. Get rid of applications. If I want to drag this back and dock it in that group, I can do that as well. I can even group my free-floating panels together. If I grab the gripper again and just drag it here, you'll see this black bar appear when I release. There we go. Now they're all grouped together. And in Windows, you can actually dock your panel groups to the left and right side of your document, like so. And some people actually prefer to work like this with the document window in the middle and to have the different panel groups to the left and the right. I wouldn't recommend it on a screen resolution like the one I'm looking at here, but if you have a large enough screen, you might find this pretty convenient. And again, this is something that you can only do on the Windows side. You can't do this on the Mac. Now, another reason you might drag a group out on its own, let me go to applications here, is simply get access to the close button so you can just get rid of it. Rather than just collapsing it or shoving it off to the side of the screen, you can just drag it out and then close it. You can always bring it back from the window menu later. Oh, you can also close a panel group too by just clicking its option menu and choose Close Panel Group. Okay, now I'm going to bring everything back to my default designer workspace. Now you might be wondering whether you can drag the panels themselves, not just the groups, out of their groups and collect them into a customized group. Well, a couple of versions of Dreamweaver back, you could do that, but it's a little more involved these days. So let's say I'm in the Assets panel here. Notice I can't just click the Assets tab and drag it out. In fact, I get this message that says to remove this item, choose Group Assets With from the context menu, which is this menu right up here. So with Assets selected here, I'm going to choose from this menu, Group Assets With New Panel Group. Notice that creates a new panel group for the Assets panel there. Now if I want to group another panel with this one, I have to go to that panel. Let's say I go to the CSS tab here. And from the context menu here, I can choose Group the CSS Styles panel with any one of these, including my new Assets panel. Notice that they're now grouped together. And of course, I can just put it right back and dock it again if I want to. But notice now when I dock it, they're still grouped together. So that's a bit on customizing your panels and panel groups. Now, if you're just starting out with Dreamweaver, don't worry about customizing your groups right away. Wait until you've spent a good amount of time with the program to see which panels you use the most often. And then if it makes sense to you, go ahead and group those panels together as you see fit. As you saw in the previous movie, Dreamweaver gives you a lot of freedom in terms of being able to move all of your different panel groups around and to set up your workspace the way you like it. So once you spend all this time setting up your workspace to just the way you like it, it would be nice to be able to save that workspace, so just in case somebody else comes along and starts moving panels around, or you've accidentally reorganized all of your panels, you can go back and quickly get it back to the setup that you like. So for instance, let's say I like working with all of my assets over to the left-hand side here, including my CSS styles here that I grouped together last time, and maybe I also want to move the Files tab into that panel, like so. Or maybe I want to have that on its own, so let me choose New Panel Group for Files, and I'll actually dock it down here. There we go. So that's a pretty custom-looking setup. Now, it's really easy to save this in case I want to get back to it later. All I have to do is go to the Window menu, go to Workspace Layout, and choose to Save Current. It's going to ask you to name your workspace layout. I'll just call this Garrick's Layout. Click on OK. So now if I look under this Window menu again to Workspace Layout, I'll see it right up here. So even if I were to switch back to the default designer view and then come back down here, I can switch it right back to my preferred layout, just like so. And you can save as many of these different layouts as you like. So if you have a certain layout for working with one website and another layout for working with another website, that's no problem. Just set things up the way you like, save it, and then you can just select it from this menu here. You can even choose Manage, so if you get really out of hand with all the different menu layouts that you have, you can just come in here and just choose to either rename it or just get rid of it. In which case it's gone, so now I have no more Garrick workspace saved here, so I'll just switch back to Designer. But that's how you can come into Dreamweaver, set up your workspace the way you like it, and save it. One of the most important parts of designing a website is to test your page in various web browsers. Because when it comes down to it, a web page is nothing more than a bunch of code, be it HTML, XHTML, or whatever. What you see when you view a page in a web browser is that browser's interpretation of the code, and each browser might interpret a page differently. Now, as time has gone by, browser standards have gotten a little bit more reliable, but it's still a good idea to check your pages in as many browsers as possible before launching it to the web. Of course, you may be one of those browser snobs saying, I designed my page for Firefox users and that's that. Which is fine as long as you don't mind that people coming to your site in other browsers might not be able to see the content the way you intended it. But if you're trying to reach as broad an audience as possible, you'll want to download and install all sorts of browsers like Firefox, Netscape, Opera, and the list goes on. At the very least, you should have the most current version of Internet Explorer, Netscape, and Firefox on your machine if you're on Windows. If you're on Mac, you should already have Safari, but you should probably also download and install Firefox and Netscape as well. If you're really serious about making sure your pages work, you'll want to check them cross-platform as well. So if you're designing on a Windows machine, you'll want to get a Mac and check out your pages there. And if you're designing on a Mac, you'll want to get a Windows machine and check your pages there. As I mentioned earlier, Dreamweaver does have some built-in tools for validating your page's code against different browser types. But if you want to know what your page looks like in a certain browser, check it out in that browser. And checking out your pages in a browser isn't just something you should do right before you're ready to upload them to the web. You should be checking at each step along the way so you can catch potential problems as you go along. So let's take a look at how we set up Dreamweaver to preview our pages in the browser or browsers of our choice. First, I'm going to open up Dreamweaver's preferences by going to Edit Preferences. If you're on the Mac, it'll be Dreamweaver Preferences. And I'm going to go to the Preview and Browser category here. In this area over here, Dreamweaver should already have your installed browsers listed. If not, click the plus button, add a name for the browser that you want to add, and then browse for that browser in your program files or in your applications folder if you're on a Mac. Notice in this area you can set up both a primary browser and a secondary browser. Your primary and secondary browsers are assigned keyboard commands to Dreamweaver, which makes them a lot easier to access. Let me cancel that for a moment. So let's say that Firefox, I'm going to make my primary browser, and Internet Explorer will be my secondary browser. So in this case, F12 will launch my primary browser, Control F12 launches my secondary browser. Now if you're on a Mac and using OS 10.4 Tiger, your F12 key has already been assigned by the operating system to launch your dashboard widgets. unless of course you've changed that keyboard command. So in Dreamweaver, your primary browser is assigned to Option F12 and your secondary browser to Command F12. Now before we leave this area, notice that there's an option down here to preview using a temporary file. If I check this box, every time I go to preview a page in a browser, Dreamweaver will generate a copy of the page in its current state and open that copy in my browser. It actually creates this temporary file. The advantage of this is that I won't have to save my page before I preview it. So if I'm not sure about a change that I made to the page, I don't have to save it, and Dreamweaver won't prompt me to save it. With this box unchecked, Dreamweaver is going to prompt me each time asking me, do you want to save the changes to this page before I actually go to preview it? So it's not really that big a deal if I do save it or don't save it, but it is going to ask me each time if I have unsaved changes. So it's up to you to decide whether that's going to be too much of a hassle. If you think it is, just check Preview using temporary file, and Dreamweaver won't bother asking you to save your file first. I'm going to leave my option checked and click on OK. So now with some content on my page, if I want to see what that looks like in my browser, all I have to do is press F12. And it opens it up in my primary browser, in this case, Firefox. Or if I want to see it in my secondary browser, Control F12, and it opens it up in Internet Explorer. Now, if you recall, we also have this button in our document toolbar that allows us to access all of our installed browsers. So if I had more browsers installed in here, like if I had Netscape, I could add that in my preferences, and it too would be listed here. So if I didn't want to make that my primary or secondary browser, I could access that from this list. And just so you know, you can also get to your installed browsers by going to File, Preview in Browser, and you'll see the same list here. And that's how we set up our preferred web browsers.